I am not a witch, but this is Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. Good evening. I'm your host, Buford Terrell. With me tonight, my colleague Clay Jones.
Good evening.
And tonight we have with us Corie Whalen, who's with the Republican Liberty Caucus of Texas.
Yep.
She'll be talking to us about a program they have coming up soon. But first, we've got some news, and I wanted to start with something local. According to this morning's Houston Chronicle, there has been a survey of citizens' attitudes about the Houston Police Department. The first of a series of meetings about that report have been held. They're not releasing the report yet, and I personally think anything that our government knows, we citizens have a right to know too. But some things have come out in this first meeting. Less than half of black Houstonians believe city police are honest, and only 52% of the black Houstonians think they are fair. Overall, only about 60% of all citizens consider Houston police officers honest, fair, respectful, and courteous. One black woman reported that if members of the community stood up for themselves during encounters with white police officers, it was construed as an aggressive act that could lead to being shot with a taser. Others were afraid to publicly complain about police at their meetings, fearing officers would retaliate against them later, she said.
I've got a really good friend, Sean. He's black, works for cable television, and he goes to work every day, comes home, good guy, watches the laws, and he even says that when he sees police, he's being super cautious around here. He doesn't like being black and being around Houston police.
Well, I should warn him about being super cautious. If we look at the history of studies in highway traffic stops, when the police report things that give them reasonable suspicion to stop, one set of facts are people who drive under the speed limit, who appear to be overly meticulous about obeying traffic regulations, who signal too often and too early. So, you know, sometimes it doesn't matter what you do.
Yes.
But anyway, I think that this is something where all of us deserve to see the full report. I think the full report should be up on one of the city websites just as soon as it can possibly be put up there. It's our information. It's our police department. We deserve to know what's being said about it. The other thing that I think is probably more anticipation than it is news is that it's less than a week now to Election Day. And just kind of running down the list, the one, of course, that's been getting all of the attention is California's Proposition 19 to legalize marijuana under state law. But there's also a referendum in Arizona on medical marijuana, a referendum in South Dakota on legalizing medical marijuana, one in, I believe it's Washington State, that changes the distribution system for medical marijuana. Massachusetts has several local opinion referenda, which are simply gauging popular opinion in local election districts, some on legalizing marijuana, some on legalizing medical marijuana. So it will be interesting to see what those results add up to.
Massachusetts has a legislative agenda that is looking at legalization.
That's true. I'm originally from Mass.
It's strictly by the legislature.
Yeah, but it's apparently not going that rapidly. And
No, it's not.
no, it was in the last election that marijuana decriminalized possession of small amounts.
Yep.
So that now possession, I believe it's of less than an ounce.
It is, yeah. I'm originally from Mass. I voted for that. The legislature, some in the legislature were working to take that away, but it did pass overwhelmingly. The citizens of Massachusetts agreed.
Yeah, and it's...
right after that passed, I was reading that they were trying to get around the back door on it, and small local district attorneys were doing town ordinances and county ordinances against it.
Yep. Which is typical. I mean, they don't usually like when the voters go against the legislature. You see that happen on marijuana issues, on tax issues, just in general. The Massachusetts legislature, they don't
two or three
take well to that.
Towns in Massachusetts passed ordinances making it, I think, a $300 misdemeanor if anyone smoked in public. But as near as I can tell, there hasn't been any real issue with those being enforced at all. Nothing seems to have come of them except...
nothing high profile.
And usually Connecticut ends up doing basically the same thing as Massachusetts. I lived there for a long time.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
Yeah, I went to school in Massachusetts twice. So, but one of the interesting things in California is that George Soros donated $1 million to use in the campaign for Proposition 19. So we'll see how spending that money over this last weekend.
And there is the alcohol lobby that put up $10,000 to go against Proposition 19. So that tells you where the alcohol lobby has their loyalties. It's to their pocketbook.
Well, one of the interesting things is that there have been a couple of studies done, and to some extent, as young people use more marijuana, they use less alcohol. So that there seems to be very much a trade-off there between the two. And we were talking about the popular press. And the new issue of Newsweek magazine has a long 5-page article, Pot and the GOP. Their subtitle is Conservatives and the New Politics of Pot. A lot of it deals with the issue in California. But there were a couple of other things in here of interest that kind of get us around to our guest as well. This article suggests that nationwide, looking at the Republicans as a whole, only about 25% of Republicans nationwide favor legalization of marijuana. Now, this is where broad surveys of the entire population show somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 to 50% favoring legalization. And if we go strictly on medical marijuana, it scores much, much higher than that.
The last one that I heard on medical was like 73%.
Yeah. But this article also suggests that within the Republican Party, there are several different factions at work. Those that tend to be more libertarian tend to favor legalization more than do those that are strictly economically conservative or the social right. And one of the people they quote in this article was former governor of New Mexico, Gary Johnson, which brings us to our guest tonight. Corie Whalen is here representing the Republican Liberty Caucus of Texas, and they've got an event scheduled soon. So would you like to tell us a little bit about what your organization is and what the event you have scheduled is?
Absolutely. I am with the Republican Liberty Caucus of Texas, and our organization is essentially a libertarian-leaning wing of the Republican Party because clearly there's systematic discrimination against third parties in our system. So we at the Republican Liberty Caucus believe in social tolerance and in fiscal and economic sanity and conservatism. And Gary Johnson, actually former governor of New Mexico, is one of the prominent politicians who aligns with the Republican Liberty Caucus. And it hasn't been officially announced, but it's been highly speculated that he actually may be a presidential contender for 2012. So he is with the Our America initiative, traveling, talking about different issues that concern him. And he has been an outspoken advocate, not only in the Republican Party, but in general, for the legalization of marijuana, which is interesting because there are no high-profile Democrats or Republicans besides him really talking about this issue. So he's actually going to be in Houston on Tuesday, November 9th, and he will be at the Crown Plaza Hotel at Reliant Park, which is at 8686 Kirby Drive. The event will be from 6:30 to 9:30. And it's hosted by the Republican Liberty Caucus and co-sponsored by the Houston Area Liberty Campaign and We Texans. Former candidate for governor Deborah Medina will be speaking, as well as some members of the Houston Area Liberty Caucus, as well as the national chair of the Republican Liberty Caucus, Dave Nail, who happens to live in Austin. So it should be an interesting event. It will definitely show that there is a liberty wing of the Republican Party. I think it goes along quite well with the Newsweek article you were discussing, because certainly I actually wasn't in favor of legalizing marijuana at first. I thought that the issue was not something I cared about very much at all. And it was actually Gary Johnson who changed my mind. I lean libertarian, mostly because I'm more socially liberal, but I was always more, mainstream conservative on the drug issue until I heard Gary talk about the issue. So I think he can change hearts and minds of more mainstream conservatives like myself and even those who are more conservative.
Yeah. I was sitting here trying to remember, I think it was about 10 years ago that he was governor of New Mexico.
Yeah, before Bill Richardson.
Yeah, and at that time, he quite frankly scandalized a lot of people all across the political spectrum by coming out in favor of legalizing all drugs, not just marijuana, which I have been saying for a long time is the only rational way to go. But even back then, when he was governor of a small state, which at that time had one of the worst drug problems in the country, he was speaking out strongly in favor of drug legalization. And
yeah. Well, one of the interesting things about Gary, I think, is that because he was the governor of a border state, it's really interesting when he ties the idea of legalization. I don't think he really doesn't talk about legalizing anything but marijuana these days.
Right.
But his focus on that definitely is tied into stopping violence on the border, which is interesting. And I think that's one way to get mainstream conservatives to think about the issue, is for them to realize that prohibition of marijuana actually is causing more violence on the border, and conservatives are concerned about securing the border. And interestingly enough, legalizing marijuana would help very, very much in getting that issue under control.
One way a lot of us have described it is to say that if you want to be mean to a drug dealer, take his money away from him. And many of you have heard me say that marijuana is just broccoli, that you can grow and sell marijuana for approximately the same price you can grow and sell marijuana. The $200 an ounce that it brings on the street is all caused by the laws against marijuana. And if we end the prohibition, we take the money away from the drug dealers. They have no motive to fight each other. They have no motive to ship product into our country. We'll take a break and be back in a minute.
Gateway. Gateway.
Get back, zombie. According to the Institute of Medicine's 1999 report on marijuana, there is no conclusive evidence that the drug effects of marijuana are causally linked to the subsequent abuse of other illicit drugs.
Brains. I need brains.
It's time to play Name That Drug by its side effects. Nausea, heartburn, development of bleeding ulcers, vomiting, swelling of the brain, extensive liver damage, difficulty with mental functioning, Reyes syndrome, and death. Time's up. The answer, aspirin, another FDA-approved product.
Okay, maybe a little of the money I spend on marijuana supports terror and violence.
Right.
And that's because marijuana is illegal.
Exactly.
When I buy a beer, that doesn't support terror because beer is legal, right?
Now you've got it.
So what you're saying is if we make marijuana legal and regulate it like beer, that wouldn't support violence.
Did I say that?
Hey, this is Tommy Chong, and you're watching Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
Call in pretty quick.
At 9, yeah.
9.
Well, yeah. Usually we put him on there. We're back with Drugs, Crime, and Politics. I'm your host, Buford Terrell, with Clay Jones. Our guest tonight is Corie Whalen with the Republican Liberty Caucus of Texas. So you came to the libertarian viewpoint on drugs rather recently, then?
Fairly recently, yeah. I would say that as I was saying, I grew up in Massachusetts, so a liberal environment. I grew up socially liberal, and I had very fiscally conservative views. I never really considered the drug issue. I kind of thought because I'm against drugs personally that I was against drugs, but the more and more I got into the libertarian viewpoint, I started realizing, just because I don't like it doesn't mean it should be illegal, of course. So I moved from just that mainstream idea that if you don't like something, it should be illegal, into thinking about it more rationally. So just because I don't smoke marijuana doesn't mean that there aren't valid fiscal and, principled reasons that it shouldn't be legal. And I agree with Gary Johnson's viewpoint on it.
Well, we're hoping to convince more people of that as time goes by.
That's right. And this is your program, so let's call in. We'll be here to answer your questions.
Yeah. We do have the phone number on the screen. If you're calling live, we will put your question or comment on the air. If you're watching us over the internet or delayed on YouTube, you can send me an email at the address given, and I'll respond to you as quickly as possible. And it's quite possible that your question or comment will be on the next show. And I suspect our next show this time is going to have a whole lot of election results and postmorteming. So, what again was the date? November the 9th?
Yep, it's November 9th from 6:30 to 9:30. It's going to be at the Crown Plaza Houston Reliant Park Hotel. That is at 8686 Kirby Drive. And if you want to find out more information, if you're on Facebook, if you do a search for Governor Gary Johnson in Houston, you'll have that there. And also, if you Google Republican Liberty Caucus of Texas, you'll get all the information that way as well. So we hope to see you there. It is free and open to the public, so certainly bring as many people as you want. And it'll be interesting to see Gary as well as some other libertarian Republicans who I think could make a difference in changing the minds of more mainstream conservatives who haven't really thought the issue through yet, but might come around if they were to understand a little bit more of the details on why legalizing marijuana actually is a good thing.
Well, Texas Republicans have had a libertarian twist for a long time. I mean, Ron Paul has been representing his district for how many years now?
It's been since the 80s.
At
Early
least
80s.
20 years, yeah. And if there's anyone that comes close to being a pure libertarian, it would be him.
Yeah.
Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yes, how you doing?
Just fine. Do you have a comment or question?
Yes, I have something I want to endure, and it's that I don't think nothing wrong with smoking a little pot because, you know, it's better than driving on the, you know, highway tearing your car up, and, you know, and things like that there. You know, I don't see nothing really, you know, wrong with it, you know. I really don't. You know, only thing I wouldn't like, you know, if you smoking in a restaurant or some things like that there. Things like that. But otherwise, I feel like ain't nothing wrong with just smoking a little bit, you know, and...
Okay.
So, what'd you say?
Okay, thank you for your comment. It's nice to hear from you.
Oh, thank you.
You know, and that's brings up another issue that comes into play is right now we have established in this city and in most cities rather tight controls about smoking tobacco in places of business or in restaurants. And I would suspect that as marijuana is legalized around the country, we'll see the same kinds of regulation come into play there. I mean,
Like tobacco.
if you think about it, there aren't very many legal products on the market today that don't have some kind of regulation on them. Whether it's lead paint on children's toys, or not smoking cigarettes in restaurants, or not drinking alcohol and then driving down the street. So I think that the people that seem to be afraid that they're just going to be marijuana maniacs running around all over everywhere just haven't thought through the way that we treat almost everything.
That's silly because, I mean, alcohol is, you know, it's just as dangerous, if not more so. So I just think it's not very rational. I mean, if alcohol is going to be legal, I don't see why marijuana can't be. I mean, my understanding, I mean, I don't advocate anyone driving drunk or driving high, but from what I've observed, it seems that people who drive high are actually safer. Not, of course, that that's okay, but I don't think that it would be rational to say, oh, people smoking marijuana are going to be worse than people with alcohol. I think it wouldn't be at all.
The old George Carlin line was that if marijuana were legal, the freeways would be packed with cars driving 35 miles an hour and the radios turned up loud.
Yeah.
Of course, we don't want anyone driving impaired, but if you'll notice, we're struggling with a real problem there in that right now the studies are indicating that texting while driving puts a driver just about the same as one who is legally drunk. And even just reaching over to change the knob on your radio causes driving impairment. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, this is about the marijuana?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Do you have a comment or question?
Well, yeah, I have a comment.
Could you turn your television down, please? Okay, now what's your comment?
Well, I think that, for one thing, marijuana is good because it's not like alcohol that would, you know, have a crazy drunk driver on the streets and everything, you know, putting everybody in danger. And with marijuana right now, that it will just keep you at a steady position, you know, just in one spot. You know, you don't got to worry about nobody. Not like alcohol that you get violent or something, you know.
Well, thank you. Clayton was mentioning earlier about the alcohol industry in California putting money against Proposition 19. I'm sitting here wondering why the Cheetos manufacturers haven't been putting money on the pro side.
Well, we're going to have to get a hold of Frito-Lay and see if we can drum something up. But, you know,
competition.
This thing about driving drunk and driving under the influence. If you look at Portugal, look at Denmark, Holland, they both basically, everything is legal. And in Portugal, if you want rehabilitation, it's available immediately. You have safe injection sites, you have people that have the right information, you and their rate of use has actually gone down.
We have another caller. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Yes, thank you. I'm in my 60s. The past few years I've been looking into medical cannabis because I have several chronic diseases,
Yes.
and the medications I have to take have caused bad side effects. I've been able to be certified for a medical marijuana in one state, but not in the state of Texas, where I spend most of my time.
Yes.
But in the meantime, I've been reading several fantastic books. One is This Is Your Country on Drugs. The other one that I've been reading now is called The Pot Book. And the thing that was so outstanding that I learned from it was that in the past 10 years, there has really been an explosion of medical research that shows just the incredible potential for cannabis to, because there are certain receptors in the brain that can help with a lot of neurological problems, and also allow scientists to figure out how the brain works. And the other receptor in the body is on the autoimmune system, which affects me, and it means that you can have it can tamp down the inflammation that is common in multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis. But because it's illegal, the research has been a lot limited. If it was legalized or decriminalized, all of the potential good, a lot of people would be able to take advantage of it. That's really the crime to me.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. She mentioned This Is Your Country on Drugs. That's a little book that came out about a year ago. I'm sorry, I can't remember the author's name right now, but it's a very good short history of recent history, the last 30 years or so, of drug laws and drug use in this country. It's very readable. It's got a lot of good information in it. The other book she mentioned by Dr. Julie Holland called The Pot Book, and it's just come out. I haven't read it yet. I read her book about 10 years ago on ecstasy. She is one of the outstanding researchers on psychoactive drugs and has been active for well over 10 years in the treatment of people who have problems with psychoactive drugs. So I suspect that the Pot Book will be an outstanding reference for all of us. I noticed you grabbing your pen when she started mentioning research on medical cannabis.
Well, when I know the lady that called. When she calls, she usually has good information, and she just mentioned a couple of books for me.
Okay.
What's the percentage of people that you said who are in favor of medical marijuana?
The last national survey that I seen was something like 73% national.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, because while I've come, further toward maybe the more libertarian view on legalizing marijuana, I've always been for medicinal marijuana, and I can't really believe that anyone would want to stifle some kind of drug that could help people in pain. I've never understood that. I found it to be very morally questionable. It's amazing to me that it's still illegal, and they would still take that from people who need it for medical purposes.
Well, you mentioned pain there, which brings up to me one of the ironies of the debates. The people opposing medical marijuana frequently say that we don't have to allow medical marijuana because there are safer legal drugs people can use. But the legal drugs people use for pain include Vicodin and Percocet, which are hydrocodone, an opioid, Oxycontin, which we've all heard about, methadone, morphine. All of these cause severe addictions and can lead to overdose and death. Yeah. And what's even worse, the Vicodin combines the opioid with Tylenol, acetaminophen, which by itself causes more deaths every year than marijuana does.
Yeah. I know too many people, even young people my age, who are addicted to prescription drugs like
Yeah.
that, and they may smoke marijuana, but that doesn't actually hurt them the way that those drugs do. And it's scary because it's actually far too easy to get those types of prescription drugs, and I don't think they're valid.
Okay, let's take another break, and we'll be back in a minute or two.
Know what we all have in common?
We are all adults who use marijuana responsibly.
Visit normal.org today and learn how you can help end marijuana prohibition in 2007. Uproot the propaganda, not the plan.
Hi, I'm Ethan Nadelman, the founder and executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance. You're watching Drugs, Crimes, and Politics. Hope you enjoy it.
There was a cannabinoid that made people hungry.
We're back. We have with us tonight Corie Whalen with the Republican Liberty Caucus of Texas. And as usual, we've been talking a lot about legalizing marijuana and particularly medical marijuana. I might just fill in a little bit here. Excuse me. The first evidences of use of marijuana for medical purposes, and this can wait until after the next phone call. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hi, Buford, it's Dean.
Hi, Dean.
Hi, how you doing, Clay? And
Pretty good, Dean.
Hi.
Yeah, I just wanted to call in and kick around a few thoughts here. We have this Prop 19 is just resonating around the world, the possibilities there, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And, there's almost daily press conferences being held by the pro-Prop 19 folks. Today they had a gathering of Latino speakers, law enforcement and others, talking about the fact that 2 or 3 times as many Hispanic kids get arrested for marijuana as do whites, and even though it's been shown that whites use more marijuana more than do other racial groups.
Let me interrupt here, Dean, to bring up a book that you and I have both been touting a lot lately called The New Jim Crow.
Yes,
because
by Michelle Alexander.
Yeah, that definitely points out the much more drastic effect these laws have on black young people than it does on the population in general.
Yeah, and the subtitle, if you will, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Color Blindness. And she points it out, proves it beyond any doubt.
Yeah.
And I think that has helped that resonance, if you will, in California, the thoughts being put forward. Of course, Professor Harry Levine out of New York University has been developing these stats. And they talked about how it impacted the black community just last week. This week, another gathering of officials within the Latin community talk about
didn't the California NAACP come out in favor of Prop 19?
Oh yes, in fact, I've spoken with Alice Huffman a couple of times. She's head of the California NAACP, and she has come out boldly, challenging others to prove her wrong, that this is impacting the black community and tearing down families and futures. And and you guys were talking earlier about This Is Your Country on Drugs.
Yeah.
It's by Ryan Grimm.
Right, yes.
The Secret History of Getting High in America. I also interviewed him back in July of '09 about this book. And, these are two of many books that are beginning to catch hold, if you will, that are beginning to be focused upon the truths that have been avoided, that have been overlooked for decades, if you will.
Yes.
To quote Richard
I wouldn't
Cowan,
say overlooked, I would say suppressed.
Right, well, in one fashion or another. But Richard Cowan stated that the reason the drug war continues is bad journalism.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge component of this misery we've inflicted on ourselves.
Yeah.
A couple other stories that came to mind today. There was one published about the attempt in California to pass Prop 19 to legalize, and this is from Stephen Downing. He's a fellow brother, if you will, in law enforcement against prohibition. Let me read from it just a bit.
Okay.
Unfounded scare tactics have supported the continued prohibition of pot for 73 years. Now the prohibitionists are hard-pressed to invent something new about the evils of pot itself, so they allege that the Prop 19 is a jumbled legal nightmare that will lead to stoned nurses in hospitals, drugged motorists, and more high teenagers. And he says, in reality, model legislation for cities and counties will follow, as will state regulations. Workplace rules will not change, and there is evidence that the use of marijuana goes down. And he closes with, however, if we don't pass Proposition 19, pot will still be available to children, and the unprecedented crime and violence by cartels and street gangs will continue unabated. I think that sums it up. What do you think, Buford?
Well, I've been saying for some time, and you've heard me say it, Dean, that the people have already legalized marijuana. It's just time for the government to catch up.
Well, and the scientists and the doctors. And here's another story that just came out today, that the California's bishops have expressed concerns about two of the initiatives out there, Prop 19. They're saying that it's not, what's the word? They're citing serious moral and practical concerns about Prop 19. Where are the morals in this, Clay? What do you think?
The morals are that we don't need to be putting people in jail for a lousy weed.
Well, ain't that the truth?
Well, Dean, I just finished reading a fantastic history of the ratification of the Constitution. Pauline Meyer, who's a historian at MIT, has just published it. She goes over the ratification conventions in all of the colonies. And the thing that struck me reading it, at the same time we're hearing these Prop 19 debates, is how very much the anti-arguments then are just like the anti-arguments now. Oh, we don't know what will happen. Oh, this could lead to horrible things. Oh, things are just going to fall apart on us. We don't dare risk it. And you know, in 1788, we risked it, we took the chance, and things have worked pretty damn well since then.
You bet they have. Yeah, and it comes back to my continual thought that it is fear that gives the drug war life. It is its sole substance, its only reason for existence.
And we all know what Franklin Roosevelt said about that. That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Right. And since 9/11, I think Americans went through kind of a shock phase where they were fearful, but now the politicians are trying to keep that fear alive. And I think more and more people are realizing we have to stand for what we believe.
It's time for us to shake the dust off. Yep. Stand up, roll up our sleeves, and say, we're Americans, we're going to take charge of our own fate, and we're going to do it.
Well, let's see, if we got a minute left, can I tell you about this coming weekend for the Drug Truth Network?
Please do.
Okay, I will have an interview with Professor Alex Stevens from Kent University in the UK. He's a professor of criminal justice over there, kind of like you. And we've got a good interview with him we're going to be sharing. I'm hoping to get John Lomax from the Houston Press to come in and talk about the scene in Houston. and hoping maybe you'll do that the following week, because this is a 3-week pledge drive there at the station.
Okay, I would be happy to do it, Dean.
And we need y'all's support. It's you can tune in to 90.1 FM Sunday, 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. And you can check out our shows online. We're now approaching 1,000 of our full programs. You can tune into at drugtruth.net. Just yesterday, I went on CHLY up in Naomi. Oh boy, Naomi, I think it is, right next to Vancouver, anyway, in British Columbia.
Okay.
And they were having their pledge drive, and I was supposed to go on for 10 minutes, and wound up being on about 35 or 40 because people were calling in their pledges in support of the Drug Truth Network and our programs that air up there as well. We're up to 95 stations that carry one or more of our programs in the U.S. and Canada. And it's an issue whose time has come. I want to urge you, please, tune in this coming Sunday, 6:30 to 7:30 to 90.1 FM, or check it out online at drugtruth.net. You guys keep up the great work. We are making great strides, aren't we?
Yeah, before you go, Dean, I want to ask you one other thing. I have been hearing about a new book that's soon to be out by a guy named Lowell, and the name of the book is Going Dutch. It's supposed to be the story of the Netherlands' actions after decriminalization. I don't know if you've heard anything about it, but at least give you a heads up so you can track the guy down and interview him. But have you heard anything about this?
I haven't. That's a first for me, but I will look it up, see if I can get the publisher to send me a copy. We'll get him on air.
Okay. Thank you much. It's always good to hear from you, Dean.
All right, y'all. Have a great one.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
And that was Dean from the Drug Truth Network. He joins us almost every show.
Yeah. Dean's become a very good leading person around here.
He is now at almost all of the major meetings around the country. I guess has interviewed everyone who is anyone in the drug reform movement, and is a great source of knowledge. And frankly, by the time you combine his radio broadcasts with our much, much smaller television shows, Houston really is kind of the center of the drug reform media network.
Right here in Texas, yes.
So see, you came to the right place.
Apparently, even though I'm still very new to this issue, so I only recently decided it probably is the correct thing to do to legalize marijuana.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that Newsweek would be talking about pot and the GOP at the time where Gary Johnson's becoming a bigger public figure. And it'll be really interesting because I think it's going to start having some bipartisan discussion in mainstream politics like it hasn't before.
What Dean and Clay both mentioned, and the thing that has surprised me, whether Proposition 19 passes or fails, it's been a major victory.
Oh, it has, because
there has been more in-depth, serious coverage by all of the mainstream media nationwide since the Proposition 19 campaign has started rolling than I have seen in the whole 2 decades or longer that I've been dealing with the issue right now. And I mean, if you look at how often that the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Posts run stories about it, both Time and Newsweek had major pieces this week. If you dabble your feet into what's sometimes called news in the cable world, it gets quite a bit of coverage there.
Yes.
I'm on a clipping service on the internet. It's amazing how many small and middle-sized towns and cities across the country are actively engaged in this debate at the moment. The domino has toppled. Whether the vote's yes or no in California, doesn't matter. That domino has fallen over.
And if it doesn't take this year, it will come on and it will pass.
Yeah. and we have brought ourselves to another break.
It's time to play Name That Drug by its side effects. Unexplained rapid weight gain, trouble breathing, unusual fatigue, fast pounding heartbeat, changes in menstrual cycles, dark urine, persistent nausea, vomiting, chills, cold sweat, dizziness, drowsiness, shaking, and confusion, and fruity breath odor. Time's up. The answer, Avandia for diabetics. Approved by the FDA.
This week in drug war history, October 30th, 1995. President Bill Clinton signs legislation passed by Congress rejecting a U.S. Sentencing Commission move to reduce penalties for crack cocaine offenses to bring them equal with powder cocaine. November 1st, 1968. The UK's Advisory Committee on Drug Dependence releases the Wooten Report, recommending that marijuana possession should not be a criminal offense. November 1st, 2002. Every prosecutor in the United States has sent a letter from the Office of National Drug Control Policy and the National District Attorneys Association urging them to make prosecution of cannabis crimes a high priority and to fight efforts to ease drug laws. November 2nd, 1951. The Boggs Act nearly quadruples possession for all narcotics offenses and unscientifically lumps marijuana in with narcotic drugs. November 3rd, 2001. The DEA raids the Los Angeles Cannabis Resource Center, a medical marijuana distribution facility, arresting its president, Scott Emler. City officials condemn the raid at a press conference attended by more than 100 center members. This is Steve Nolan for the Drug Truth Network.
You're watching the Drug, Crime, and Politics show. I need less business. Help change the laws. Fewer people locked up for this foolishness will help all of us.
Smuggling the drugs.
We're back with Drugs, Crime, and Politics. I wanted to bring up something else about Proposition 19. And this is that the U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder sent out a private letter to the ex-drug czars saying that in the event Proposition 19 passed, that the federal government would vigorously enforce the Controlled Substances Act in California. But I think that we need to look a little bit more closely at what he said and what he did not say. He did not say that they would go to court and sue to block the California law. He did not send his letter out publicly as a public press statement from the Attorney General. He did not send any instructions to the U.S. attorneys that prosecute cases. And if we look at something else, last year, California had over 60,000 marijuana possession cases. Mm-hmm. That's considerably more than all of the criminal cases handled by all of the federal courts across the whole country. There are approximately 5,500 DEA agents, and that's for all of their offices all around the world. The Houston police force is approximately 5,500 officers. The Los Angeles police force is considerably larger than that. So I'm just wondering where the Attorney General is going to get the money and the courts and the officers to move into California and vigorously enforce the laws against marijuana.
They'll have to charge people federally because...
Well, it'll have to. Now,
they'll have to charge them federally.
And I can tell you something about that. A few years back, 10 or 15 years, some of the federal attorneys started bringing low-level, say 1 kilogram cocaine distribution cases to federal courts. The federal judges all across the country, and particularly here in Texas, chewed those U.S. attorneys out horribly for wasting his time and cluttering his docket with those penny ante cases. It got so that anything like that, the U.S. attorneys were shipping off to the district attorneys to be tried in state courts. In fact, the federal government even gave monetary grants to the Texas counties along the borders to pay them for the cost of prosecuting the cases that the federal courts didn't want to have anything to do with. Now, can you see federal judges who are used to trying Enron cases and antitrust cases involving Intel, what they're going to say to a U.S. attorney that brings in some kid for possessing one joint?
Or even 2 pounds.
Or even 2 pounds. It's just not going to happen.
No.
It's not enforceable. It'll probably just end up blowing over eventually.
Yeah. And as I say, the significant thing, I think, was that he omitted any threat that he was going to bring suit to have the California law set aside. For one thing, he's got no basis to set it aside. But, you know, when you start just counting on your fingers, you have to wonder what in the world could he possibly mean by saying he's going to enforce the federal law vigorously.
It just don't work.
Well, you know, you can possibly see him going after a few large-scale commercial growers. But Proposition 19, as I understand it, allows people to grow a 5-foot by 5-foot patch. That's still way too small to interest the federal government.
Well, federal government, didn't they just prosecute Eddie Leaps out there in California for the 23,000 plants that he was growing beside the highway?
Well, 23,000 plants, yes.
And the judge, the federal judge told him that he wishes he didn't have to sentence him to anything.
Yeah. Well, now that's the other thing, too, is that since the Supreme Court several years ago ruled that the sentencing guidelines are only advisory, not mandatory, a lot of federal judges have been giving downward sentencing from the guidelines. And, you know, they're not going to send people to jail for an ounce of marijuana. For one thing, the law as it's written, most people don't know it, but the federal law has a very lenient sentence for people possessing personal amounts or transferring it for no money. It's basically a mandatory probation if they're under 25, with expungement of the record if they complete the probation. That's one reason you've never seen any federal marijuana prosecutions.
But, you know, you get that type of a prosecution, I don't care what the amount is, they're not going to go to jail for that charge. They're going to get this drug testing dirty on a UA. They test dirty for marijuana and they still end up in prison.
You know, that's the real problem, is they keep saying nobody goes to jail for marijuana, which is an out-and-out lie to begin with. But what happens is they either turn in a dirty urine sample to their probation officer, or they're late with a payment to the probation officer, or they move without telling the probation officer. And for this kind of technical violation, they get snapped to prison to serve the full term. So a lot of these things that show up as probation violations actually are jail terms for possession to begin with.
Right. I mean, it is probably the farthest thing from the truth. A couple of years ago when I was on Ray Hill's program, I got 50 letters from people that were in prison right here in Texas for testing dirty on a UA for marijuana.
Yeah.
And they were doing years now.
Wow.
So, well, we're about to come to the end of the evening. Election day will have come and gone before we get back to you. My crystal ball is way too cloudy to try to predict any of the outcomes, but I'm sure that in 2 weeks there'll be a lot to hash over. And just remember this, whoever gets elected next Tuesday, their job is still to represent you. But they can only represent you if you let them know what you want. It's your job as a citizen to keep your representatives informed of what you want. Talk to them, write them, go visit them. Write them by hand on paper in an envelope with a stamp. That works best. Make an appointment to go see them in their local office in your hometown. Look them in the face and say, why do we still have stupid laws against marijuana? Make them answer you. Ask them, why have you not voted to repeal the laws against marijuana? Make them answer you. And let them know that if they don't answer you satisfactorily, that you're more than willing to fire them next election day. And would you like to give us the time and place of your meeting with Governor Johnson?
Absolutely. It will be Tuesday, November 9th, and it will be at the Reliant Stadium Crowne Plaza on Kirby Drive. If you want more information, just go to Google and type in Republican Liberty Caucus of Texas. And if you're on Facebook, just do a Facebook search for Governor Gary Johnson in Houston. We hope to see you there, free and open to the public. Bring your friends. And again, 6:30 p.m. at the Crowne Plaza by Reliant Stadium.
Okay. Any last words of wisdom, Clayton?
I just say, please, everybody, go out there and vote. Try to vote this single issue. We have a lot of local officials that we really need to get rid of. And I figure if they're in office, good deal to get them out and try somebody new.
Okay, we have one congressman who claims to be a Jeffersonian.
Culberson.
You might ask him if he knows that Jefferson grew hemp. And why doesn't he want us to do the same? So, I apologize for the state of my voice tonight. Maybe when we come back, I'll be able to speak a little better. But thank you for joining us. Enjoy election season. Let it get your blood a little hot. Get excited about it. And make the government do what you want it to. Thank you, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
We have these private prisons that have now hired lobbyists to go get minimum mandatories and
I began to understand that the 17 or the 19-year-old kid I had in the backseat of my police car was not a criminal at all.
Remove the profit motive. If you remove the profit motive, you can do away with almost all these problems. And how do you do that? Simple. You end prohibition, which can only mean one thing. Legalize drugs. Legalize all drugs.
If we really want to improve our urban neighborhoods, the most important thing that we could do, the single most important thing that we could do, is end the war on drugs.